Hey there, welcome to episode 66 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, the managing director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo, recording this on the early mid-afternoon of May 21st, 2024. Tuesday already. This is the title of our last episode 1 week ago. Today, we will speak of the order of operations, how priority lists are not always the same, depending on how you look at them. Hopefully, wherever you have found your audio programs in general, and this one in particular, you will see a episode description with our show notes. You can see the summary and a couple of links. We have only two non-typical links in the link section. Let's get started. I think today's show will be a little bit shorter, maybe, than normal. We'll see. Well, let's find out. Let's get started, and we'll reach the finish line sooner. The summary, as you should be able to see in the show notes, a very long time ago, I learned from various workplaces that it is quite easy to make every task priority one, so long as you are not the one running down the list to complete the tasks. Running down the list to complete the tasks. Well, that reads that the words are very different from the intonation. So long as you're not the one running down the list to complete the tasks. Not everything can be priority one, especially if there's only one person checking those boxes. So let us review the prioritized task list and see where we are here with the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. The link section, the first two are usual link to our website, innovateforvegas.org. That's an F-O-R, Innovate for Vegas, no spaces or dashes, .org. It is our business website. It is very, very much unchanged as you see it, as I'm speaking at this moment. The public published version of our website is very much unchanged over the last several months. There's an embedded podcast player which reflects the current published episode of this very program, but otherwise it's mostly a static page that needs to change. We'll get to that. In particular, it has been suitable for the business at hand, which was forming our nonprofit nearly 2 years ago, forming our public charity about 18 months ago. It's been enough, barely minimally viable. But there it is, linked, as always, innovateforvegas.org. Used to be codeforvegas.org, and we still do have that domain name, but I don't think it's even forwarding anymore. Email still gets sent to the right place, but if you visit codeforvegas.org, I don't believe you will land in a useful place. And good, that's the way it should be. That's probably a good thing, because Code for Vegas is no more. Our GitHub organization, github.com/innovateforvegas, just like our website, Innovate for Vegas. That's where we keep all our project repositories and discussions, our onboarding documents. It would be printed out as one big document, I guess, a GitHub book, Gitbook. You can check that out if you like. There will be more going on there in coming weeks. There is a sort of a sub-project because right now we are the only contributor to it. The Project Act GitHub organization. Once we get that rolling, which I will get to shortly, once we get that rolling, hopefully there will be some diversity in collaboration and participation from across different former brigades. That'll be a nice thing. Two quick links regarding the semantic web. I did not know, I think about a little over 2 weeks ago, I first came across Notation 3, which sounds like a Philip K. Dick short story title, science fiction about a weird parallel universe. Notation 3 is actually a way to describe graphs. Graphs are, I think I said this incorrectly last week, a subject, a predicate, and an object. So the triple, the RDF triple, the tuple, so you can describe relationships between things. They can be chained together. It's not linear. It doesn't have to be linear. It can be nodes and edges and so on. So notation 3 is a fairly readable, maybe overly flexible way of expressing those relationships. The nice thing is it's a superset of terse tuple language, I think it is, TTL, turtle. Turtle is because TTL, turtle. So if you look up turtle or turtle 2, valid turtle is valid notation 3. So if you write notation 3 in a sort of a turtle compliant form, it's very readable. It's much more readable than XML. RDF files are typically published and interacted with as RDF documents. Typically, it doesn't have to be 100% of the time. It could be JSON LD, could be RDFA. These are embedded in like HTML documents. So there are a few ways to do it, which is nice. So that means, for example, something I've been talking about for probably a year now, and I talked about this in our previous episode, 65, RSS, which is used kind of the de facto standard for sharing audio programs such as this one. RSS 2.0 is very XML, too much maybe. RSS 1, not to be confused with RSS 0.93, I think it was, 9193, which eventually became 2.0, which is a Dave Weiner thing. Very XML namespaces, extension through XML namespaces. RDF 1 was RDF site summary. RSS 2 is really simple syndication. RDF site summaries leverage more graph. So you could author an RDF site summary, an RSS 1.0 file, in Notation 3 or Turtle or other, if you were hand constructing such a thing. And then you could transform it into an XML RDF site summary, RSS 1.0 file that a podcatcher could catch, could read and parse. But I think that RSS 1 should be something to consider rather than as a standalone file, as something that could be embedded in web pages so that you publish one thing rather than having to direct someone to a different thing, which can break. In my travels, RSS files always break. They don't get updated. They move around and people don't properly do a 301 redirect. So various problems. And at the end of the day, you can embed the computer readable information in the human readable document rather than having a separate document. I think that makes everything a little bit easier. One-stop shopping. You can see this in schema.org implementations. They have relied on microdata, so you can use attributes in your HTML, similar to XML attributes. You can use JSON LD, etc. So the schema.org approach to publishing the graph data in the human readable document is already happening. So it's not even something that needs to be pitched. So it's already happening. So I personally think a move away from, this would take forever if it ever were to happen, but I think a move away from RSS, separate file, separate XML file, not readable. Like why have a completely separate thing? You can have real HTML. You don't have to do this C data. Whenever I publish a very simple show notes rundown with 2 sections. My notes are in exactly the same format, but because of the limitations of the RSS feed, you end up publishing, I think 4,000 characters, and I have crossed over that sometimes. So I don't put the full notes in there. I could. There's nothing secret. The notes are what I'm talking about today, as is the case every time. So subhead, so H3 if you're an HTML person, and an unordered list of bullet items. So UL, LI for unordered list and list item. And some anchors now and then. Sometimes I'm in italic, so emphasis or strong, italic or bold. And that's it. But it's very difficult to get a consistent outcome in different on different platforms, different podcatchers, the way they render what's called a CData section, because RSS being XML is not HTML friendly, so you cannot directly embed HTML. I personally think they could go with Markdown, make it simpler, or you could separate the stylized content and put the description back to a normal plain text, the bare minimum, so that if you really want to display the like a structured like I have, like an outline format, or if you want to have embedded images or video clips or whatever, you can have all the links, you can have all the structure, you can do what you really want to do using or with expected outcomes, and have the RSS file have the plain text, and you already know where the page is. So if you want to extract the HTML description of the show, it's right there in normal HTML. You can display it as an iframe or whatever. There's all kinds of ways to do it. So you can extract it. Maybe the RSS feed should point to the ID of the description object in the document object model. So you would say started ID equals description, and it would be like a article or a div or a section or something. Anyway, I digress. Today we will talk about the order of operations and the different ordering depending on which direction you are looking from, made all the more difficult because we don't have enough people working on things at this time, but we also don't have any hard ship dates. So that's a weird combination of good and bad, I suppose. So let's start with priorities. There are 2 or more priority lists, as is almost always the case with any endeavor. Then maybe not so frequent with only one person working on everything, but there's still 2. The outside priorities as seen by others, and the inside priorities as seen, well, by me, but by other people inside an organization or inside a project or inside a collaboration circle. So you don't have to be on the same or in the same part of the same organization, but you might be working on a project together across organizations. Either way, there's always at least 2 lists, and they may align perfectly. That would be amazing. Inside, we need to have a real programmable data-driven platform, for example, as the basis for experimentation and demonstration. So this is an example where in the form of our Innovate from Vegas site, this is one of the things we'll talk about today. If others want to join in, our website is a great place to show off some of the experimentation, some ideas, interoperability with the MyMuni project, which I will detail more soon in moments. If others want to, if other people working on other projects want to sort of test interoperability, so all of our projects, to the extent that they are intended to, should be able to interoperate, and that's hard to do with a one-page static website. So that has always been on deck to be replaced. It's still on the priority list. Internally, it's high priority just because it's right now it's what's called, well, it's not really tech debt, sort of, but it's technical debt. It is technically debt. It's something that's on the to-do list that takes up time and energy that could be spent somewhere else. So we should get on to dynamic website version 1, version 0.9 beta, whatever. And we should be able to use that platform as part of the other things that I'll talk about today. So it has to integrate, and other projects have to integrate all in both directions to the extent that they should. That seems a little vague, but as a matter of sort of proof of concept, we can do things that are not necessarily practical, but that are functional, so that we can say, okay, that does work. It works as intended. Here's a working example. Case in point, if the MyMuni project has a content creator aggregation feature, hint, then it should be able to discover audio programs published, whether they are published RSS 2.0, which is what you find out in the world today from your Spotify's and your Apple iTunes and your whatever else, or RDF site summary, RSS 1, or possibly, which is, that would also be an XML file for public consumption, or as JSON LD, RDFA, embedded microdata in HTML documents. So that would be a great way to flush that out and say, here is a working example. Outside, we have goals that include communication, connection, and collaboration. So our tools need to enable those, especially collaboration, which means they need to be functional and usable. And our website doesn't really do that. Our website is not intended to be it's intended to be more of a destination as far as public consumption. For testing and demonstration, could do more. But the casual user, the casual passerby visiting our website should be able to view a web page or two, discover what our projects are, who's working on what, where to find more information, where our repos, our repositories are, and so on and so on. So right now it barely does that at the bare minimum, not attractively. So at the very least, we could be experimenting with HTML styles, themes, our logo, our round Innovate for Vegas Foundation is a sort of a seal style with hexagonal tiles inside a ring. Could be stylized for different seasons, different news like sporting events, different components of the fun economy. So it could be styled in the color scheme of a sports team or a holiday or who knows. So there are all kinds of things we could experiment with externally once that is quote unquote done. By the way, websites are never done ever. So I'm going to list three priorities, 3 items that are on the list, but in different orders. So I'm going to present them in the outside order, but in the inside order, they're probably backwards, or they're almost backwards. So last week, I'll get to that in the third item. Okay, so inside, Project ACT, the autonomous cohort transformation, which is now also, probably more importantly, the autonomous cohort tessellation. Tessellation is a mosaic, like a tiling of what you can imagine different organizations around the country, visible, fitting together, flowing. So the autonomous cohort tessellation, Project ACT, is going to make use of semantic web principles, so that notation 3 that I mentioned earlier. Oh, and I forgot to mention the other link, which was the RDF. It's a W3 consortium. It's World Wide Web. Isn't it consortium? W3 consortium? W3 overlords. So RDF is one of the standards. It's part of what the W3 works on. So RDF concepts and abstract syntax. Not intended to be a full reading assignment, but I did want to make a connection between the richness and the age, maturity of the resource description framework. I think I said file or something one time. Framework, resource description framework, which is all about graphing graphs. Graphs are not charts. Charts are what you think of when you say graph. But if you talk to a data person or a math person, a graph is the connection, the connectedness. An edge connects 2 nodes. That's a graph. An edge could connect one node to itself. It could be a directed graph with arrows. So one node leads to another, etc. So it's a pretty cool idea. It doesn't have, not everything has to be flat or a hierarchy. It could be a tangled web, worldwide perhaps. So the semantic web principles that will show up in the Project ACT implementation, which I talked about last week in episode 65, will also appear in my Muni in general, especially in Smart Social. So that's where you're going to start talking about who, what, where, when, why. So there are RDF implementations of calendar streams, people, locations. So we can do some interesting things in the way we publish data so that it's interoperable. So that's where we can have some data on our own website to interact with MyMuni. And so long as we're able to consume the JSON LD, honestly, I don't remember what LD stands for at this moment. It's escaping me. But it's basically JSON data, so with a little bit extra. So as long as you can embed, and WordPress does this, it's their SEO module, one of them. As long as they can embed schema.org information, you can embed different types of graph data about the content of an article or an event, of a personal biography page, profile page, etc., etc. So if we use Notation 3 as an authoring language, as a markup language for people working with organizations that are former brigades that are now autonomous cohorts, if they can publish the transformed output as XML files, similar to how RSS works today, but they will be RDF XML files. We've already talked about description of a project and friend of a friend. Those are about publishing information about projects and people or organizations that are interconnected. And we can also make use of schema.org schema. Those can become a little bit more complicated, an embarrassment of riches. So each schema has so many elements, terms. They can be a little bit overwhelming. So starting with something simple, decades proven, still in use today, description of a project, friend of a friend, and then supporting schema.org markup as well, we can have all the features of Project Act be the starting or jumping off point for all the features that would make their way into the MyMuni platform or Smart Social, really. On the outside, Project Act represents our approach to those 3 C's, the collaboration, communication, connection, and collaboration, right? So we need to reach out to people and talk to them. We need to connect and discover whether or not we are on the same page, aiming in the same direction, and then actually collaborate in those directions to advance the ball, as they say. So I'm putting Project Act first because on the outside list, Project Act is more important than the MyMuni project, which is annoying, but if it works, it would be a way to reach out directly to other former brigades and demonstrate a way to communicate and connect and collaborate without having to form a central planning organization, which is kind of a showstopper right now. That's a little bit of inside baseball, but decentralized will benefit substantially from making use of technologies that already exist, like RDF and various schema, and then later things like schema.org schema, which are richer. They're supported by Google and others. They're actively maintained. I believe schema.org's which I mentioned last week in episode 65, schema.org's last release was, I think, in February of 2024. So they have ongoing updates to different schema features and detail and so on. So RDF is not going anywhere. I had a conversation with Open Fresno and Code for Sacramento, which will soon be Open Sacramento, last Wednesday. So the 15th of May, I joined their virtual project meeting. They have them every week. I think there were about 5 or 6, 7, 8 people, but I ended up speaking to about 3 or 4 or 5. It was a virtual call, so I don't remember exactly who was on for the duration. We talked about how some of the Project Act concepts could be used for connecting educational projects, so not directly in the civic volunteer space, but in the education space, which if you're a longtime listener, you may remember that the education capstone is our other, overarching project, Virtual Vegas and education. So that might fit in nicely. So the Project Act notion as a way to connect and enable potential collaboration across localities is sort of it is the top of the priority list for public-facing, outside-facing priority list. MyMuni and Friends. I've mentioned this before, I think also last week. The MyMuni project, formerly MyVegas, is a fundamental starting point inside. It's as good as any of our projects that we have described so far. So it's not the we must do this first internal project. Technically, we started with open transit, which is still critical, if I may say. Our transit system in the Greater Vegas area can always be better, much like our education system. And that's just generally true. No matter how good either of those things are, and so many other things, they can always be better. And one should always be thinking, we could make this. It's already at 100, or if we want to stay culturally relevant, it's always at 10, but we can go to 11. So we can always be thinking, how can we make things a little bit better, improve them, make them more accessible, etc. So the MyMuni project is a reasonable starting point. It is a, practically speaking, probably tied with Project ACT for second place. So it's a reasonable project where we could have some actual practical outcomes that would be usable and visible to the public. The same is true of Open Transit as another example. So when we did launch Code for Vegas Foundation 2 years ago, Open Transit was our first hackathon. It was our first project. It's still there. It has very practical applications because there are people who make use of public transit. The public transit infrastructure in the Greater Vegas area would benefit from real, thoughtful, on the ground, hey, I use this service. I think it would work better with this, and we can talk to actual riders, users, consumers of the service. We can talk to the drivers, the operators, the providers of this service. We can talk to the operations people at the RTC, the Regional Transit Commission. So the Open Transit project is a much more, it's a project that would connect directly in a co-creation manner with more people in different roles. So that makes Open Transit a more important project as far as including more co-creative input, collaboration. But the MyMuni project can facilitate the Open Transit project. So if MyMuni is up and running, we have it in a deployable state. And there's a whole another collection of podcasts that I've been working on with for Cafe Genius Impresarios about launching a deployment. So launching a startup around deploying the open source projects, MyMuni, Smart Social, etc., here in the Greater Vegas area as a proof of concept. So we'll actually have the labs deployment in a monetizable state. So rather than funding a nonprofit, we can actually have a for-profit. The for-profit can, then this, by the way, is not a new business model by any means. I always tell people, if you're using Android or if you're using any website, like 90% of the internet is powered by Linux, the Linux kernel, which is free software developed by the Linux Foundation. So free software developed by quote-unquote volunteers, but they're able to be compensated. When I worked at Intel for a time was one of the largest or most frequent, or by some measure, among the top contributing commercial organizations to free software. So they would pay their employees to work on Linux kernel components because a lot of Intel processors run the Linux kernel. So there is already, nothing new here, deployment of free open source software developed by volunteers in for-profit projects. And that makes it a little bit easier to return some of the value of the contributions of creative work, time, effort, energy on the part of the volunteers. So civic volunteerism can be, that's not a great word, but rewarded by deploying the open source contributed, done for free projects for people to value, or maybe advertisement to value, subscriptions, advertisements, other value for value or other models, so that people who have contributed their time on the front can receive or realize some benefit. And it could be something as grand as, can we hire the whole team that developed this because we want to do something similar, or a lot of possibilities. So this is generally, this is not a new path idea in the world of open source project development. So we'll see how that goes. That's why we are always looking for people who want to contribute to our projects with attribution, so that if you work on the project, code or not, you are given credit for it by name, and then ideally in other ways. Outside, the MyMuni project, which was initially called MyVegas, is a great rally point for cross-region collaboration. So once we have other organizations, former Code for America brigades, which have had the rug pulled out from under them, once we have them communicating with each other, not in a Discord server, not attempting to form yet another top-down central planning organization, which thus far hasn't gotten very far. They can continue doing what they're doing, the way they were doing it, the way they want to do it, and advertise what they're working on, who is working on what their projects are, how they're connected to other organizations in a decentralized manner, making use of the description of a project and friend of a friend, for examples. And again, these are already in use. They have been for decades to create catalogs of projects and graphs of interconnected organizations, right? So that's what they're there for. So the MyMuni project could appear as a description of a project node, part of the Innovate for Vegas effort, but could be contributed to by just about anyone with attribution. The MyMuni project could be, it is, an open source project that could, rather than being called MyVegas, MyMuni for my community or my municipality, could be deployed or put to use or included in, integrated with other features, other tools, other platforms, other notions in other places. So there's nothing about it that says, oh, sorry, this is only for Vegas. So we're trying to make use of existing standards, of long proven, mature technologies and methods and tools and so on. So rather than developing an app for how to deal with the city of Las Vegas, and I don't know that one app would be able to do that, but rather than saying we're just going to focus on Vegas, we can do things just like the internet has done that are reusable, quote unquote, everywhere, right? Ideally everywhere. Same with the Open Transit project, right? So as long as we don't assume that you must be working with Regional Transit Commission from Southern Nevada, right? Whatever we do in Open Transit should be applicable with the RTC and NV, Northern Nevada, or somewhere in Oregon, or somewhere in California, or somewhere in New Jersey, somewhere in Florida, wherever. So as long as we don't commit to regional specificity, if we include abstraction, same goes for language translation, same goes with documentation, just the way that you present it to people, just don't make it about here. Make it about wherever. Make it about anywhere. So from an outside perspective, the MyMuni project is important once we start connecting different organizations, different people, different projects through Project ACT. So our contribution to the Project ACT network would be the MyMuni project and its related projects, Smart Social, Open Data Capture, Open Transit, the Welcome Project, which is about visitors to a city. Doesn't have to be Las Vegas. So MyMuni means my community, my municipality, where I live, where I am. So I should be able to interact with my smart city, the human interface for a smart city. Smart Social is about connecting people and connecting data to people and people to data and so on. Open Data Capture is about actually capturing that data. So it's not so much people, more about surroundings, environment. So all of our projects sort of fit together like that. So the MyMuni project makes a good entry into Project ACT. It will benefit from modernity, including especially ActivityPub and Activity Streams, which are the fundamentals behind the ever more famous Mastodon and not quite as famous, but coming along, Lemmy, which is like a Reddit-like platform. You got your PeerTube, you got your PixelFed, so those are YouTube and Instagram-like. The list goes on, more websites, more platforms like WordPress are integrating ActivityPub. So you'll be able to interoperate with different websites, different web properties, the way you want to, rather than the way the latest AI trends are going to tell you how to interact and interoperate. At the same time, it will benefit from a legacy. Legacy meets modernity. So the semantic web, like I said, some people will say, oh, the social internet that could have been. But the nice thing about the internet is it's not a one-way street. it's not it can be the wild, wild west. It's right there in the name. www. You thought it stood for World Wide Web. Huh. So the possibilities exist to take advantage of things that we know work, that have worked for decades. Hey, if you use email, by the way, email's not really going anywhere, and it has worked for a very long time. Every time there are problems, there are suitable workarounds. Spam will always be a problem. If people would get used to signing their emails, at least you would have some notion that the email you're looking at is really from the person you think it is. There are some other best practices and some habits that we could all adopt. But at the end of the day, email's not really going anywhere. It's been made less important to some, but still there. Unfortunately, Gmail, Google Mail, has like an 86% market share. That's a different problem, but bottom line, we can leverage email for things like newsletters. We can leverage RSS feeds for things like media distribution and site summaries. We can leverage schema.org, and we can leverage semantic web for more creative interoperability. We can make use of APIs, gRPC, GraphQL, REST, etc. So the MyMuni project is sort of the hub on which we will build the various other projects we're pursuing, and hopefully they'll all interoperate with our next item. So third on the outside list, but first on the inside list, our own dog food. This is an expression that I first heard at Netscape when I was working there. We eat our own dog food. That means we use our own products. So everything internally at Netscape was browser-based. You would file your expense reports. You could find out any job recs, job descriptions. You could project specs. Everything was internal websites, internal news groups. Remember when news groups were a thing? Deja News. So we had internal news groups. We had internal mailing lists. We had internal websites. So everything was our own making. And that's how you know your stuff is working, because you're all using it all the time. So inside our website and infrastructure are starting points for the next phase of our continued effort in everything, as a test bed for new ideas, as a practical example for those joining our projects, how some of our processes work, how some of our interoperability would work, how we make use of all the semantic web stuff to connect different websites or to discover different projects and people and organizations and so on without having to join, right? So the example is instead of saying, hey, is anybody on this Discord server doing something, working on a project, etc., why do I have to join a Discord server? Or similarly, why do I have to be in your LinkedIn network in order to communicate on a certain topic or be discovered by an algorithm? You should be able to advertise the things you're working on, have any spider, any robot can go through and read your dope files. They're just standard XML files. Like, oh, project, organization. How are these connected? We can make a tessellation, a mosaic of projects and organizations, see how they're interconnected. We can actually make use of AI on our own terms to summarize projects, discover similarities. Like, oh, these 3 projects are all kind of similar. Maybe we should talk about how we can help each other, how we can interoperate, how they can be made compatible, if that is desirable. So from the inside, our own website and our own infrastructure will enable those directions as we continue into our 3rd year. Outside, our website and infrastructure will interoperate with the MyMuni project as it reaches a deployment state. As an example, how to make the MyMuni concept work, how one website can interoperate with another website, and it doesn't have to be post your link like in a news feed. It could be in different ways. And that's the ActivityPub angle, but it's also semantic web, peer-to-peer sort of probing like an RSS feed. So sort of like syndication, a couple different ways to look at it. That's the nice thing about the Wild Wild West. So all aspects of our own infrastructure and deployments for our own website and our related properties, like the For.Vegas project, the Talks.Vegas project, Challengers.Vegas, are important to consider not as throwaway or minimally viable, but as working examples and tests of what we're trying to accomplish. So since we since this will fit into the other two things I've already mentioned, from the outside, our own website is like, okay, it should work. It should work in and as a part of Project Act and then the MyMuni platform. From our perspective, our own website as practice, as experimentation for deployment of infrastructure as code, for automation, for testing, for trying out new ideas, for demonstrating interoperability, our own website should be a starting point for our own efforts. But unfortunately, all of these priorities, really, when you think about it, they're all top priority. But they're essentially backwards, for better or worse. And all the while, my voice is fighting with me the whole time, because yesterday it was fine, today labored. It should go without saying, our organization should not be satisfied with one-page static websites, nor with anything canned like a WordPress site, not a Wix, not a Squarespace. Part of what we're trying to do here is to include innovation in our minds as much as in our name. And it should be a part of our work. Rather than saying, well, let's just put up a WordPress site and call it a day, we should try new things, novel approaches, integration of old ideas and new concepts, maybe some invention. That's innovation. So as I mentioned, we are coming up on the 2-year mark. June 16th, 2022, we filed our paperwork and were granted our, I think they call it a state business license, technically, our Nevada nonprofit status, state of Nevada, of course, and our 501c3 determination, which would come in October 2022, retroactive to the date of our formation, the date of our incorporation. We're an actual Nevada nonprofit corporation. So a real business ID, real EIN, all that. So we're about 2 years of public charity. I'll let you celebrate. One of the original co-founders and co-captains of the original Code for Vegas, which was founded, I believe, 12 years ago, if I remember correctly. I think it was 2012. 2014? I think it was 2012, but it might have been 2014. But the fact is, it was more than 10. It was before I arrived in Vegas, so it had to be before 2013. So I think 2012. Sean Looker, an Amazon employee that became a Zappos employee, if I remember correctly, was the co-founder and co-captain with Quinn. What's his first name? Anyway, so Sean has been a member of our board of directors. He was very helpful, played a vital role in our early days, getting the band back together, so to speak. So when we were first talking about this, we learned about, the history of Code for Vegas, the interactions with Code for America, the Open Data Project, which still exists. The city of Las Vegas maintains a fairly reasonably rich set of open data, geocommons, open government for budgets. Geocommons is like boundaries of different wards and cities and business license locations and so on. So a lot of interesting stuff. I've barely scratched the surface with those examples. So that's how Code for Vegas Foundation got its start as the original Code for Vegas, part of Code for America. We never rejoined Code for America, so we were not affected directly by the sunsetting of the Brigade program. So as everyone is entering a new phase of the civic volunteerism business around the country, Sean he lives in another state, as he has this whole time, and he is otherwise occupied. So like a booster rocket, he got us this far and is now vacating his seat, stepping down for another to fill in. So we have a chair to fill with Sean Looker prints on it. And we have another, we could easily add 1 or 2 more board members, which would be nice because it'd be more people to tell the story or to understand what we're trying to accomplish. What we're trying to accomplish is not hobbyists making, little prototype apps or, oh, look, a bouncing ball on the days of building demos or simple little things are over, because we can actually build real things that add to real resumes that lead to real jobs or real benefit, not only for communities, but for the individual contributors. So if you work on something that really works well, that's how people get internet famous in the tech world or in the innovation world. Is you do things unusual that solve real problems. You do things in unusual ways. That was bad grammar. So you have novel ideas. You are innovative, and you put things out there for people to use, and then something magical happens. That's a far side. Something happens here, and then profit. The outcomes of our projects will ideally be some value proposition that is agreeable to the people that contribute their time and energy and their creative works. As I say all the time, I don't necessarily want people to work for free. I don't put in the necessarily. I don't want people to work for free, but I want them to be willing to work for free. In other words, I believe that if we do good things, what is it? If you do what you love, the money will follow or something. But in this case, there's an actual deployment plan. So we work on things. We work on projects. We deploy them in a value for value model, not as part of a nonprofit endeavor, but in for-profit commercial deployments that are powered by volunteers from Innovate for Vegas, possibly other organizations, possibly different individuals, full attribution. And then when those projects become valuable, subscribers, advertising, straight up donations, other forms of monetization, value for value, tip jars, whatever works for everybody involved, then some of that would flow to the people who make the project possible. So they would opt in and say, hey, I contributed to this project. I would like to be a part of things like continuing engineering or continuing translation or testing or different roles that are not necessarily coding explicitly. Marketing, telling the story, being a part of the ongoing project. It's plural. So we have very little in the way of financial support, as has been true for the last 2 years. Luckily, especially when no one is participating in the last few months, except for me, and we're all volunteers, so I make as much money as the next person in our organization. That's like zero. But the goal is to develop projects and deploy them in a monetizable value for value or similar model so that our work will have a return of value, return of investment on the part of the individual contributors and the organization, and everybody wins like magic. So ideally, people in your communities, wherever you are, would see these projects and say, aha, now I see how this works. Could I be a part of this? Could I support this? Could I give money to those people? Could I give money to the project? Could I donate money to this nonprofit? Right. So we as a for-profit venture the Innovate for Vegas Foundation as a nonprofit venture could accept tax-deductible donations to support continued civic volunteerism, working on community elevation projects and so on. The for-profit venture could accept real revenue, advertising, subscriptions, straight up tip jar style, pay developers, contractors, employees, etc. Could be a real business that is powered by the work done by civic volunteers. So, and again, absolutely not a new business model being done every day all over the place. Except in this case, we're actually going to connect civic volunteerism to this return on investment notion so that people who actually contribute to projects do realize a benefit when the project succeeds, when people realize that there is value in what volunteers have been working on. So there you go. No rug pulls, no surprise, no, hey, you didn't opt in. Everybody who works on a project is a part of the project. Now, if you work on a project and you bail after 2 weeks, I gotta be honest, you're not gonna get the same sort of return as someone who actually sees it through to deployment and continues working on the project and so on. So it is about participation, not showing up, but we don't even have that. Not showing up. Not showing up does not count. So our budget has been nearly zero for so far, except for the filing of fees. So our filing fee annually for our list update, so who's on our board of directors and our governance, is $50. We don't have to pay for a business license because we're a Nevada nonprofit. So our city business, we don't need a city business license, but our state business license renewal is basically $50. There are domains to renew. Luckily, we've been making use of Amazon free tier for some things. We have a lot of free services because we are a 501c3. So eventually, though, the things that we deploy might take money for experimentation, for some nonprofit elements of our Smart Social project, for example. It'd be very cool to have nonprofit communication channels like a Mastodon instance for Vegas so that we don't need to charge people, but they would be able to donate to support the platform. That would be nice. Tax deductible, of course. So that could be a component that is operated as part of an ongoing experiment of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. But then that could interoperate via ActivityPub, etc. with the MyMuni project deployment, which I talk about during the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program, which I will be recording another episode of for Friday this week. So that's it. That's what's up. We don't have a lot of monetary needs so far. We're not looking to make money, but we do, money does grease the wheels of progress. So as we approach more participation, more reach, more grand schemes, more novel ideas that we wish to actually try out and implement and experiment with and get feedback, co-creation with the larger population, etc., a few dollars here and there would help. And so that is on the list for our third year as it commences on July 1st, 2024. So we'll see how year 3 goes. That is where I will leave it this time. Episode 66 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. Don't forget to visit our website. It will look nicer any day now, and it will be the primary point of publication. It will be the place where you can find our audio programs, full show notes, etc., regardless of where you download from iTunes or Spotify or wherever. You'll always be able to find the main source on our own website with our own maybe RSS feed, because you got to maintain the old ways, but ideally we'll be able to test out our embedded semantic web feeds, schema.org, etc. So there you go. Thank you so much for listening. As always, thank you for your support and participation as we enter our third year. It starts with listening to this audio program. It could continue by sharing it with others. It could be made that much more interesting if you actually participate in projects or project discussions, or at the very least, if when you see our MyMuni project taking shape and being visited upon the greater Vegas area, you might try it out. Be kind in your feedback. Be constructive, but also honest. And hopefully that will set the tone. And if you want to work on projects as well, so much the better. Our pay is awful, but we have big plans for the future. How do you make money doing this? The answer is simple. Volume. Thank you for listening as always. Until next week.